Okay, so picture a motocross bike that's also part jet ski suddenly shot out of a giant slingshot over a giant pit of electric eels. Oh, and everything's on fire. Alright, so the producers of XXX 4 still haven't answered any of my suggestion emails, but I'll keep trying. We know the fourth XXX movie is on its way eventually, so why don't we take a look back to see some of the truly insane Easter eggs and other juicy tidbits from the James Bond Does Parkour franchise. Let's get started. Despite what The Rock might have said in the past, it seems like Vin Diesel is a hard-working guy, at least when it comes to stunts. As the director and the production team tells it, Vin was very hands-on during the first movie and was adamant about doing as many stunts himself as possible. He said he was very ambitious and kept trying to push himself, to which the director had to talk him down and convince stuntmen to handle things on occasion. Overall, Vin Diesel just sounds like an excited kid in the candy store. You know, if the candy store was a heart-wrenching action set piece with dangerous stunts involved. Vin Diesel has a few iconic roles in his resume. Of course, Dominic Toretto is number one and always will be, but after that, I say it's a toss-up between either Riddick or Xander Cage as to what Vin Diesel is most known for, at least in live action, that is. And while it's almost impossible now to think of anyone else who could fill the extreme sports-loving super spy role, it almost wasn't Vin Diesel with the XXX tattooed on the back of his neck. If the studio had their first choice, it would have gone to past Hulk Eric Bana. And I'm not saying anything negative about Bana. He's a lot of fun and given some solid performances over the years, but for him to be Xander Cage? I don't think so. That's a role that seems specifically suited for someone like Vin Diesel. It's very clear that XXX is both a spy movie, but also not really a spy movie. You and I probably have a very clear idea of what a spy movie is like, but Vin Diesel and the production team wanted to negate expectations and reinvent the wheel, so to speak. This is very clear in the first film's opening scene, which sees the standard, stereotypical suave secret agent absolutely fail in his mission. He just doesn't fit in this wacky industrial metal-loving environment and is quickly discovered and taken out of the picture permanently. Man, I'd like to see what would happen if James Bond tried to enter this world, don't you? I mean, Xander Cage would probably challenge him to a skydiving competition or something. Vin Diesel was obviously very enthused about being this extreme sports-loving action star, and it sounds like he really put in the work. Before the film, Diesel had never ridden a motorbike before, but instead of just sitting in his trailer and demanding someone else do it for him, he went out and learned how to ride himself so he could do some of those scenes. On top of that, it's reported that Vin also underwent serious weapons training in order to really sell the part he was trying to play. He sounds like the type of guy who would legitimately get XXX tattooed on the back of his neck if it meant the movie would be better, don't you think? The very first time we're introduced to extreme sports junkie Xander Cage, he's stealing a senator's red Corvette and taking it on a joyride for his extreme sports show, the Xander Zone. It ends with the car being driven off a cliff, and those of you who'd love to see Vin Diesel drive cars off other things, which, let's admit, is all of us, probably got a good kick out of this. But although Vin Diesel really did fight to perform most of the stunts himself, this was one he couldn't quite do. The driver of the car, when the car is falling through the air, is a stuntman wearing a Vin Diesel mask. And my big question is, you think the stuntman kept that mask afterwards as like a souvenir? How do you make someone look cool? By putting them around other cool people, of course. Everyone knows that. So when it came time to really sell that Xander Cage was a serious extreme athlete, the director of the first film made it a point to cast famous X Games veterans like Tony Hawk, Rick Thorne, and Matt Hoffman to be friends with Xander to help with his street cred. And the director also spoke with a ton of athletes beforehand to get an idea of how to shape the Xander character. That was probably a good idea to consult experts. If they had asked me, I probably would have just said something like, extreme sports guy like extreme sports. One of the standout set pieces in the first film is Cage's Colombia mission, where they have to escape a drug cartel's plantation while an incoming army rains fire down all around them. I think it's one of the scenes that solidify the film as something mind-numbingly awesome, but the amount of work to make this scene work was anything but simple. It was shot over the course of 7 nights, and the grueling shoot was only made worse by how expensive everything was. For example, all the rounds being shot from the helicopter cost $10,000 per minute. That's not chump change. The first XXX movie did all right at the box office, at least enough to warrant a sequel. But then when the second film, State of the Union, didn't do much business overall, it felt like this franchise was officially done. But then fast forward to the late 2010s when Fast and Furious grew to become one of the most popular franchises ever, which caused the studio to sit back down and think how else could they capitalize on the popular Vin Diesel brand. This resulted in the third movie, The Return of Xander Cage, being greenlit. So overall, we have the success of the Fast and Furious franchise for helping bring back the XXX franchise. And honestly, that's probably close to the same reason why we ended up with another Riddick movie. But even though the studio was interested in more Xander Cage, was Vin Diesel? Honestly, at first it didn't seem like it. The way Vin Diesel explains it is that he was on the fence about returning, but his close friend Paul Walker's tragic demise really affected Vin in a way where he wanted to distract himself with work, and thus he chose to make another XXX movie. On top of that, when he was hesitant about returning overall to an old role, he remembered what Walker had told him about realizing how important some of their characters were to audiences, and that further enticed him to return. In case you didn't notice, Xander Cage has a lot of tattoos on his body. I mean, what better way to show you're a cool, extreme sports star than some ink, right? Well, there's actually a few cool tidbits with Cage's tattoos. For starters, when they were shooting the movie, they tried a new, less time-consuming method to get the tattoos on, which probably saved a lot of time, don't you think? And then other things you need to know is that in those intricate tattoos are actually references to both Melkor, which is Vin Diesel's D&D character, as well as a pair of angel wings and eyes as a tribute to his late friend, Paul Walker. Why did Vin Diesel decide to do this particular first film all those years ago? Well, the way he tells it, he joined because he wanted to serve an audience he thought was underserved. As he puts it, he felt the spy genre was getting to be oversaturated with these old school super spies, but he wanted to prove that someone from the new generation could take the reins and handle themselves in the evolving spy genre in today's world. He wanted to explore the idea of a normal person, a relatively normal person, being asked to do something patriotic and save the world. Wow, that's way more analysis than I would ever expect from a franchise that had people play grenade roulette in the third movie. When Vin Diesel decided not to return for the sequel, the producers had to find a new lead for the second film. But what would happen to Xander Cage? Well, in a particularly brutal 4-minute deleted scene, we learn that Xander Cage perished in a fiery explosion. Even though we never saw his face, he wore a signature fur coat and had the tattoo, which is basically all that was needed. So how did we know Xander perished? Well, the deleted segment sees an unseen Cage run into a building that immediately explodes, and then we see the charred remains of the character's scalp, with the iconic XXX tattoo clearly visible. But then producers changed their minds about that scene in case Vin Diesel ever wanted to come back. Good thing too, right? When the second movie was in production, there were actually 2 scripts in development at the same time, as producers weren't quite sure what direction they wanted to go in quite yet. One of them was the DC political thriller we ended up getting on the big screen, but the other one also sounded kind of fun. It involved a more international adventure that took place mainly in Southeast Asia and dealt with things like pirates and other shady and corrupt government organizations. But in the end, the DC political thriller won out. Who knows, maybe they can adapt that unused script for the fourth movie. In the first film, there's a big final chase scene in Prague, which has a whole fleet of fighter jets trying to blow up Ahab before it can release the deadly Silent Night. The story behind the fleet of fighter jets is actually pretty cool. The producers initially asked the Czech government for the use of 1, maybe 2 planes for the sequence, but the Czech government was so eager to have their planes and squad shown that they suggested that the filmmakers use the entire fleet for the scene instead. Sometimes even stuffy governments want to get in on the fun, right? Donnie Yen is one of the most talented martial arts actors in the world right now. Every time he's on screen, he wows and dazzles us while turning his opponents into mincemeat. It's awesome watching him perform, and although I'm happy he's in the third movie, that almost wasn't the case. Originally, his character, who was the other XXX agent that Xander Cage must deal with, was written for Jet Li, who was on board with the project. But then Li had to drop out of the movie due to unknown reasons, and Donnie Yen was cast in his place. Again, I think Donnie Yen is amazing, but I would have liked to see that special Jet Li brand of awesomeness in a XXX movie, wouldn't you? Speaking of Donnie Yen, this is a really fun fact. You ever just look at another human being and just have to tell them they're too good at what they do and they need to stop? Well, that's sort of what happened on the set of Return of Xander Cage. Donnie Yen is such an impressive martial artist that he was actually moving too fast for the cameras to accurately film his motions and moves. So they had to actually film Yen in slow motion in order to capture what exactly he was doing. Can you imagine that? You could be standing there and all of a sudden be kicked by Donnie Yen and you wouldn't even see it coming. That's how fast he is. Speaking of replacements, the third movie actually had a part written for UFC fighter Conor McGregor. The controversial fighter was being courted to play Hawk, the right-hand man of Donnie Yen's character. Talk about an intimidating duo, right? But right around the time of production, McGregor had lost a big fight and was taking some time to get in the right headspace and refocus on his career, so he wasn't available for the film. Instead, fellow mixed martial artist Michael Bisping took on the role instead. Sure, he's not McGregor, but I think he's a pretty worthy replacement, don't you? When you're making a movie about extreme athletes doing super spy activities, you're going to have to mix things up to keep things engaging for the audience. This led to MXMA. Oh, what's that? You haven't heard heard of it? Well, there's a reason for that. It's actually a fighting style that was invented and formed specifically for this movie. Yeah, when the stunt teams had to coordinate a fight scene involving motorbikes, they successfully crafted a brand new fighting style that both would be effective and doable on motorbikes, as well as just look awesome on camera. Now, if only we could get MXMA in the Olympics next time, I think that would make for a must-watch event, don't you? After the first movie was all about extreme sports, the writer of the second film made the baffling decision to change up the formula and do something else. As we know, the second film was more of a political thriller, and the writer wanted to focus on that more than over-the-top stunts and action sequences, which, I mean, I guess is fine, but it's weird to build a brand off a certain type of movie and then try to change everything up for the sequel. That sounds like the writer didn't quite understand what people liked about the first one in order to replicate it. But then again, you never know. Some fresh perspective has worked well for other franchises. But it's nice that the franchise threw that serious tone out the window by the time the third one came around. Who was the writer of that second film? Oh, Simon Kinberg? Yeah, that makes sense now. A fun Easter egg in the second film occurs when they first discuss Ice Cube's Darius Stone as a potential hero for them to recruit. While talking about him, they flash his picture on the screen where we see a young Ice Cube. This was actually a real picture of Ice Cube when he was part of the famed rap group NWA, which must have been a fun sight gag for the audience back then. When finding someone to replace Vin Diesel for the second movie, they wanted someone in the same vein but still different. And that's why Ice Cube was perfect. Although he was just as intimidating as Vin Diesel, Ice Cube brought a different energy to the role. But one thing that was similar to both Diesel and Ice Cube was how they approached stunt work. Ice Cube, much like Diesel, was adamant about doing as many of his own stunts as possible, much like Diesel was. Yeah, that definitely sounds like the right actor took up the XXX mantle, right? Too bad that second movie isn't just better overall. Vin Diesel is surprisingly one of the most savvy social media celebrities in the world right now. He has one of the largest followings because of his constant updates, and he definitely knows how to draw in a crowd. Sure, his movies outside the Fast and Furious films don't always do great, but they at least have a lot of hype around them. You want proof? The trailer for Return of Xander Cage netted more than 100 million views in just 2 days when it was first released. For perspective, The Force Awakens got 112 million in 24 hours, so yeah, that's kind of a huge deal. Again, that goes back to Diesel's strong social media following all over the world. Besides the Cartel escape, the other big set piece in the first movie is the classic escape an avalanche by snowboarding away scene. Now that's pure entertainment right there. You think the writer sat down and tried to think of the most extreme yet most ridiculous thing they could have Cage do and settled on snowboarding away from an avalanche? Probably right. And while the scene is mostly CGI, because as much as Vin probably wanted to, they couldn't have Cage flee a real avalanche, it still was difficult to put together. The sound effects alone on the avalanche was quite the undertaking, with the director revealing the post-production sound team added around 20,000 sound effects to the avalanche to make it as harrowing and realistic as possible. Mission accomplished. Speaking of the avalanche scene, the whole setup was the cause for an almost game-changing injury. While filming the scene, Vin Diesel ended up almost seriously hurt. As the director puts it, Vin kept wanting to do higher and higher jumps, and during one instance, Vin ended up crashing and landing headfirst into the snow. The director was convinced in that moment that Vin Diesel had broken his neck and the worst had happened. But nope, he was fine. He just got a little bump on his head that made him forget that he was a powerful alien weapon and then befriended a young boy named Hogarth Hughes. Wait, no, sorry, that's the plot of The Iron Giant. My mistake, I get those mixed up all the time. By the time the third movie came out, things were just ready to get ridiculous again. Gone was the course correction of the second film, with them trying to be more serious, and instead the third film really tried to up the ante in terms of ridiculous stunts, action, and moments. You could also tell they were having a lot of fun. In the first scene, when Gibbons is trying to recruit a famous soccer player, a title card pops up saying that he thought he was being recruited for the Avengers. And why is this funny? Because the guy recruiting him is the same guy who plays Nick Fury. I hope the eventual fourth film continues this type of self-aware humor, don't you? Now, if the fourth film doesn't see the extreme sports athletes and spies go to Mars and perform some sick snowboarding on those red mountains, then what even is the point, right? Bigger is definitely better in this franchise's case, so let's get wild.